New York Congressman Peter King, Republican on the Intelligence Committee, House side. Sir, how are you? And a good Monday morning to you.
I'm doing fine, Bill. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for your time. I know you saw the stories over the weekend. The president said, I've never worked with Russia. It's a big fat hoax, a disgrace to even ask the question. What's your view on what you read in those stories?
From what I've seen and heard, if this is true, what the FBI did is absolutely disgraceful. They have been investigating the Trump campaign from the summer of 2016. Absolutely nothing, zero had come up involving President Trump. James Comey told that to the president. The reason President Trump fired Comey was Comey refused to say that publicly, that the president was out under investigation. For the FBI to use that firing, that legitimate firing, as an excuse to launch an investigation of the president of the United States as to whether or not he was a spy, that's almost like a coup within the government. I mean, that is absolutely disgraceful. To have no evidence at all and to be investigating the president of the United States is, to me, what this does, this is not an indictment of President Trump. This is an indictment of the FBI leadership, and it proves, I believe, what President Trump has been saying all along about the bias at the top of the FBI that was against him, whether it was Comey, McCabe, Strzok, Page, all of them, Baker. Fact is, they were against President Trump, and they were abusing police powers of the government to go after the duly elected president. Absolutely disgraceful.
And Congressman, on the Washington Post report claiming the president went to extra measures to conceal the details of this conversation with Vladimir Putin, Senator Ron Johnson was asked about this and had this to say.
I have no firsthand knowledge of what the facts are here. I do know that President Trump was burned earlier by leaks of other private conversations, so I could certainly understand his frustration from that standpoint. But you said earlier, this is not a traditional president. He has unorthodox means, but he is president of the United States. It's pretty much up to him in terms of who he wants to read into his conversations with world leaders.
And that is, of course, Ron Johnson from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. That was his response.
Yeah, I totally agree with Senator Johnson. Considering all the leaks that come out of the White House, out of the government, out of the deep state, whatever you want to call it. Remember, the first few days President Trump was in office, they were leaking the contents of his private telephone conversations with world leaders. So the last thing that President Trump would want was to have his private conversations with any world leader ending up in the front page of the New York Times, because there seemed to be a direct link from some people in the government directly from the president's office, where the president would be talking, whether it was here or overseas, his conversations going directly to the New York Times or the Washington Post. So I don't blame the president at all. We're talking about national security here. And if you're talking to a foreign leader, person who can be considered an adversary, the last thing you want is that all over the news. But here's the deal. People act as if somehow there's some secret talks going on with the president and Putin, which are dangerous. How about when President Obama was caught on a microphone whispering to Putin, wait till the election's over, and actually talking to the president of Russia, telling him to tell Putin, once the election's over, I'll be able to give him a better deal. I mean, that to me, if anything, showed collusion, it would be that. And it wasn't. I'm just trying to make a point here that they go after President Trump for everything, and yet the most obvious example of a president talking to a foreign leader in a whispering way about a deal he was going to give him was President Trump talking to Medvedev about what Putin could expect once President Obama was reelected.
I'm going to get to the shutdown here in a moment. Just one more question on this whole Russian matter. I think the quote was something like, transmit to Vladimir that I'll have greater flexibility after the election. That's the comment to which you're referring. Yeah. You said at the beginning, at the outset,
and I stand by what I said. That's wrong.
I got it. You said this is an indictment of the FBI. Now, the New York Times says no public evidence has emerged that Mr. Trump himself secretly conspired with the Russian government or took directions from it. That is from that same article. I just don't want to lose sight of that comment from the article, the way it is written there. Do you believe Bob Mueller is also charged with investigating the FBI to see the actions they took and the behavior that came from the FBI leadership?
I certainly think he should, and whether or not it's in his charter, the fact is he's gone far afield anyway. Remember, this started out about collusion. It's gone all over the field to Michael Cohen's taxicab medallions in New York. So this has gone everywhere, and to porn stars and everything. So yes, I think someone, if Mueller is probably the ideal person, because he's had so much access to look at what the FBI did. Was this an abuse of power by the leading law enforcement organization in the country, by the top people, to go after the duly elected president of the United States? I can just imagine if this had been a conservative administration going out and Barack Obama coming in, if the Bush FBI, people who have been in power under President Bush, if they had started investigating President Obama.
Meanwhile, Congressman, the shutdown continues, and the president and the White House are taking on Democrats for this trip they've taken down to the beach over the weekend. Sarah Sanders wrote this in a tweet. Democrats in Congress are so alarmed about federal workers not getting paid. They're partying on the beach instead of negotiating a compromise to reopen the government and secure the border. And it's about 30 Democratic members of Congress that went down to Puerto Rico for the weekend. They've got this special performance of Hamilton down there. They're raising money, etc. But obviously, this is an opportunity for the White House and Republicans to say, you are not here. You are not trying to resolve this issue. How does this get resolved, Congressman?
Yeah, first of all, it's terrible optics. They shouldn't have done it. Listen, I'm not one of these people who take shots at people for traveling for meetings, etc. But to do it at a time like this, when the government employees are not getting paid, it sends the wrong image. It's wrong, and it shows to me a certain arrogance. To me, this should not be that tough a deal. And I would call on both sides. I'm sort of in the same boat as Lindsey Graham here. I mean, the president, to me, the Democrats, they've always supported a wall in the past. Give the president his wall. If they want to take some of the money out, fine. But basically, give the president the wall.
But the president just said he's not interested. If Lindsey Graham said, let's reopen the government for 3 weeks and work this out, the president was just asked about that and said, I'm not interested. Are you urging the president to do the same?
Yeah. I would like him to do that, but even if they don't have to reopen the government to get this done quickly. Again, give the president the wall, at least a good part of the wall that he's asking for. Secondly, the president, the Republicans can give the Democrats DACA, TPS. This should be a very easy deal to make. Both sides have to move. The president has moved, by the way. I mean, when he gave his speech the other night, the wall was, or the barrier was like 4/5 down on the list. So the Democrats have not moved at all. They're locked in. They won't move because they can't be seen by their base as making any kind of an agreement at all with President Trump. So right now, listen, I was against the shutdown to begin with, but we are where we are. The president is showing flexibility. The Democrats are not, and they should.
Peter King, thank you for your time. When are you back in Washington? I know a lot of your colleagues were hit over the weekend for not being in Washington.
Yeah, I'm going back to the next plane. Listen, if there's any purpose of being in Washington, I'd be there. I'm within 2 hours on any given notice. I can be there, but I'm going down actually this afternoon.
Okay. Peter King, thank you for your time, sir. The Republican from New York.
Thank you, Congressman.